some objectives for today. So let's discuss the kind of the cumulative kind of collective effects of COVID-19. And I also wanted to mention the racial unrest that's happening as well, because I think that's affecting a lot of us as well. Let's talk about self-care and the role of inspiration and all of this, and then let's discuss. So before I go any further, I do want to say that the word self-care is thrown around constantly. It's associated a lot of times with things like massages and bubble baths and things like that. And those things are wonderful and certainly part of my own self-care, but it's much more than that. So just bear with me. I know that that is, can kind of sound trite sometimes, but I wanna really do more of a deep dive into what that means. So just bear with me. Try not to get turned off by the term. I myself get turned off by the term. I will be using the term self-care, coping, and inspiration a little bit interchangeably during this talk. And they'll just kind of all blend together. You'll see that some of the things for inspiration are also things that can be used to cope, things that can be used for self-care. So just wanted to clarify that I'm aware that there is just a ton of overlap, and you'll see it too. All right, so let's talk about the effects of COVID-19. So I have been since, what was it, March 20 something, been working at home, counseling music students, and I've been hearing the same thing from everyone and experiencing the same things as they are. So we have lost our structure in our days. We're at home balancing work and children and trying to create spaces to work in. I'm coming to you right now from my art studio / office, former dining room. And, there's decreased boundaries with that. We're all trying to adjust. We have a dramatic increase in anxiety kind of across the board for everyone. We're all managing feelings of overwhelm and just distraction that comes with that. Particularly for performers, we're grieving a lot of lost opportunities for performances and for collaboration and socializing and cancellation of events. And that's been a very real grief that's happening for folks. I don't know if you all have experienced that, but it's very, very real. And then hopelessness, helplessness, loss of motivation, a lot of guilt for not being more productive. I don't know if any of you thought, oh, I have extra time, I'm gonna teach myself another language, I'm gonna learn to paint. I mean, everyone had these ideas when this whole thing started, myself included. I was, halfway through a French, lesson myself, and then just thought, this is not what this is. So there's a lot of guilt for not being more productive. That's across the board. People are reporting feeling uninspired, which for me is just that's so important and so heartbreaking. Because as musicians and as artists, we need that. We absolutely need that. Boredom, irritability, existential crises, confusion, loneliness, right? So I cannot see you guys' faces. I can only see one little row, but I'm assuming that you guys are, kind of have experienced some of this, or we're all together in this. All right. All right, so let's talk about self-care, because that really is the way through. I really like this quote. I'm big on quotes too, Dr. Puccinelli, so I have sparsed them throughout this presentation. I want you to think about that really deeply though, right? So like, we have to be okay. Our art, our big art is our life. I love this quote. Okay. So let's start talking very, very basic first things about self-care. We have to schedule it, right? Like we have to actually make time to do it. So I think it's hugely, hugely important that we maintain any kind of a sense of normalcy by controlling what we can control, right? We can control our schedule. We can control that. It feels out of control sometimes, I'm sure. There's too many things, there's too many different, being pulled in different directions, but that is something that we can control. And speaking from, I'm an artist, I have a very free sense of time. I would prefer not to be on a schedule. I would prefer to float from creative thing to creative thing and sort of not follow any kind of a routine. But I'm telling you what, my schedule has saved me this entire time. I am at the computer at the same time every day after doing my self-care, right? I am on a schedule and I have followed it almost to the T. And it's been an absolute lifesaver. I get up every day. I get dressed as if I'm going to work. I put on makeup. I come. I sit at the computer. So I can't say enough about that. So I'm following the same routine that I would follow if I were at work. I know that's difficult if your work isn't as scheduled as mine, but it's hugely important. So just a suggestion to try to follow your typical work hours, set boundaries with your time, resist the temptation to work all the time. That's a really big problem, I think, with people working from home. It's not that, as maybe our employers might think, it's not that we're not getting enough done, it's that we're not stopping ever. That's real. So I also like to suggest that we have a separate space for work and that we can leave that space when we're done at the end of the day. I think that's really important as well. A lot of people have completely just sort of like set their calendar, their planner aside during this time since March. Just haven't really been using it. We're just trying to kind of figure out what's what. Maybe people are using things on their phone, but I would suggest to pull it back out, whatever system you used before, and get self-care on that schedule. All right, so these things are things that I consider non-negotiables, right? Kind of obvious. I heard there was a big snore from the bulldog. Sorry if you guys heard that. All right. You time. So I don't know if this is just a synonym for self-care or if it is something a little bit different. I feel like it's a little bit nuanced, but I think it's important, worth mentioning. Find what brings you joy and relaxation. That's so important, right? Schedule time for just yourself so that you can be more energized and more mentally and emotionally grounded and better able to face what's going on, more fulfilled and motivated. Put it in your planner, like I said. Super, super important. And then I also feel like, you know, self-care can be sort of like taken to this other level of almost like spirituality, right? So for almost everything, we know that mindfulness is good, right? So and by mindfulness, I mean sort of the practice of being in the moment. I don't necessarily mean sitting on a cushion and meditating, although that is on the list, but mindfulness, sort of just being in the moment and checking back into the moment. So much when things are kind of up in the air and there's so much anxiety going, you know, kind of floating around, we're very much into the future. And so mindfulness, if we can come back to the present moment, even if the present moment is chaotic and messy and whatever, we just check back into the present moment. It's super helpful with managing anxiety, with managing what's going on, with just kind of managing our own thinking. The practice of gratitude is sometimes very difficult in trying times, but it's worthwhile. Monotasking is something, I learned that term in about the last 6 months, and I've been saying it nonstop since then, because, you know, we talk so much about multitasking, and that is sort of the complete opposite of mindfulness, right? So I love the idea of intentionally monotasking, intentionally putting our focus on doing one thing, even if that one thing is the dishes or listening to music. Because so often for me, I listen to music while I'm doing other things, right? So like doing one thing. I invite you guys to try that one out. Prayer, meditation, obviously, that's obvious. I don't need to say more about that, I don't think. And then letting go of perfectionism, and really, especially during this time, embracing that it's good enough, right? That is something that I think, in my experience with musicians, it's never good enough. So really trying to embrace good enough. It's liberating, it's worth it. Give it a shot. All right, so then the tangible things, these are the things that we see, you know, in magazines or we see on the internet. These are kind of more of those things, like things you can do for your self-care. They're hugely important, obviously. You can pick and choose, you can come up with your own, but these are just some basic ones that that I feel are at least worth highlighting, right? So connection is super important. Scheduling the time, I think this is the third time I've said that, very important. I might say it a few more times before we're done, but schedule the time, get your feelings out, emote, sleep, you know, you get the idea. Further down the list, say no when you need to. We're going to talk about that in a minute more. And breathing. So when we get, we also hear that all the time, like take a breath or whatever. Breathing is the very first thing that gets affected when we get anxious or upset. I'm sure you guys are aware of that, but our breathing gets more shallow. So the reminder to breathe is actually really kind of critical, right? We breathe all very high up in our chest when we're anxious. All right, and more about living in the moment. Okay. So these are some more kind of abstract ideas for self-care. These are more like attitudes or more like things that would happen inside your own, you know, your own mind. And we don't think of self-care necessarily as these kinds of things. We think of them more like the massages and bubble baths and all that kind of stuff, you know, from before, from the previous list. But I just want to maybe just introduce the fact, or not the fact, but the idea that that these things that can happen inside of our head can also be part of our self-care, right? So listening to our intuition, you know, more fun, saying what you mean. I know that, you know, not being a people pleaser is a very difficult thing for a lot of us who are caretakers, a lot of us who are parents. But there's a time and a place to check that instinct, right? And I put don't speak bad about yourself on here too, just because I think that's something that habitually we all do quite a bit. Don't give up on your dream, be kind to yourself, let go of what you can't control, stay away from drama and negativity. Again, these would not be like typical self-care ideas, but I do want to just kind of expand the idea of what that could be. And my very, 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 very favorite self-care technique is practicing self-compassion. And again, that's not a tangible, but it's hugely important. Can't say enough about it. And it's very hard for people to do. So it is a practice. You have to almost be self-compassionate to even try to practice it because it's hard. Okay, so let's shift a little bit into inspiration. So I love this quote by Freud. I've been, you know, again, talking to music students who have kind of lost their way with inspiration recently. And I started the research about, you know, can we create opportunities for inspiration? Can we use it as a way to cope? Can we use it as a way of self-care? And I think the answer is yes. But I do have some questions and observations that are just kind of like, you know, just kind of, I don't have all of the answers about this, but I think it's critical. I don't know if we need to be inspired to be motivated. There is some research that that would indicate yes. I'm not sure about that. I think sometimes we can go ahead and do the thing without being motivated. And you know, can we create it, and can we help ourselves sort of be more open to the experiences? I want you guys to think about that and maybe bring that up in the discussion portion. But what I have found in the last few months of practicing this with my clients, practicing this with myself, is that we can actually create opportunities for inspiration. We can practice being open to experience, which is one of the characteristics of people that are inspired, is that they have it's kind of, you know, it's a little bit like intangible too, but they have the characteristic of being open to new experiences. And that would allow inspiration in. Observing nature closely is a way into inspiration. So again, like that's connection. When we're connected to nature, you know, we feel part of that system in a way, and we look closely at the beauty of it. That's definitely a way in. Practice appreciation of beauty and excellence. So I don't know if you guys have taken those kinds of personality strengths tests. A lot of people, people's employers have asked them to do that. A lot of people at UNT have done that. I personally was asked to do that by my department director. And my number one strength, I actually thought it would be creativity, but my number one strength was actually appreciation of beauty and excellence. Which you wouldn't necessarily think of. I didn't think of it as a strength when I first heard that that was my top strength. I was a little bit disappointed. And now I'm thinking of it as absolutely it's a strength, because I can be inspired by listening to a beautifully, executed piece of music, or looking at a tree, or looking at art, or anything, a film. I mean, I can be inspired really easily by those things. So kind of what I'm hoping is that I can help sort of open that up in others. We also have found that inspiration is contagious, right? So if you're around someone who's inspired, if you're listening to someone, or you're, even if it's reading a biography, it doesn't matter, that it's contagious. So we can catch it from other people. I do think that we still have to show up for our work regularly, meaning we have to, do our practice. We have to, for me, it's that I have to show up in the art studio and paint, even if I am not feeling like it. So we show up and do the work regularly. There's a lot of authors actually who have written about this. Obviously their work is solitary and it's a little bit different, but that they will show up to write, and they're only inspired maybe like 10% of the time, and that the rest of the time though, they're just there kind of plugging away at it. I do think there's something to that. And if we can't, if we're not inspired to do the actual work, then I think doing work that's around the thing that we need to do is also helpful, right? So that could be, if you're not inspired to play your instrument, but your instrument needs to be, I don't know, worked on somehow, like even just making that happen, right? So either tuning it or cleaning it or whatever, like that's something that's like kind of a peripheral thing to doing your work. And I think that counts too. And then for me, this is what I was mentioning earlier, I intentionally consume inspiring film and art and writing and music. I do that as a way to feed my own inspiration. I do that as a way to cope. And I do that as a way to practice self-care. And I would love to invite you guys to give that a shot if you're not doing that already. All right, and I just want to share this story. I know I'm sharing a lot about myself, but I am my number one research subject, right? As we all are. But when the Black Lives protests started, I wanted to engage. I wanted to do something, right? So I did the things that I thought I could do, right? I read the books, I marched, donated money, watched the documentaries, read some more, listened to Black folks, had conversations that were difficult, signed up for courses, extra courses. And I really needed to manage the feelings. And what I turned to was music, which I normally do. And I did an extensive amount of research on protest music, listened to hours of it, and compiled, in my opinion, the most excellent playlist from Duke Ellington to Tupac Shakur. And I know I'm speaking to classical musicians, and it's kind of a funny thing to mention Tupac in this presentation, but honestly, that's where it led me. And I shared it with, people. And, again, does this action help? Does it help further the cause? I don't really think so, but, it did help me stay inspired, and I think it helped others stay inspired and engaged. And I just share that as a kind of just a personal account of how inspiration can help in these ways, right? It can be a coping tool. It can be an act of self-care. Does that make sense? All right. And then I would like to sort of suggest some things to discuss in your smaller groups, right? Because what I hear from people all the time is like, yeah, I know I'm supposed to be practicing self-care and I have these obstacles, right? So I want you guys to discuss your obstacles. I want you to make a little map, a way around these obstacles, right? Because we have to. This is it. This is what we got, you guys. Like we have to cope with our feelings. We have to practice self-care. We just do. We can't care for others. It's just like the quote that we heard at the beginning. We have to put our face mask on before we can help others, right? I want you to think about the role of inspiration in your own life. And I want you to think of at least one way that you can invite inspiration in. And, you know, because so many of us are dealing with families and partners and work and home life and all of these things, I want you to think about a boundary, a specific boundary that you could set that would help you with your self-care, that would help you with your coping, that would just help in general. So these are just a few ideas, right?